You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans! Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and there's a lot of college basketball to get to. There was also a semi-notable MLB signing. I'll also do a little This Day in Sports History and a Mount Rushmore. I promise you, I will do both. I'm really not going to talk too much about the Astros' really bad apologies this morning. I'll just say one quick thing. It's clear that they don't feel bad about what they did. In fact, if they didn't get caught, they'd probably still do it. And, they don't show any kind of remorse. They can say they do, but they don't. These last few months have been a case study in what not to do when you're faced with this kind of scandal. And my mom always says you can learn from everyone. You can learn what you should do, and you can learn what you should not do. So, hopefully, when we're looking back at this, people will realize that this is what you should not do when you're apologizing for getting caught for something like this. But at the end of the day, I don't really care. It's a non-story. Alright, it's done. The sign stealing is in the past. Major League Baseball has disciplined the appropriate people in their minds, and it's done. I'm done talking about it. It's on to next season, and I'm just focused on that. I'm focused on seeing what Garrett Cole can do for the Yankees. I'm focused on seeing what Mookie Betts can do for the Dodgers. I want to see how all the new faces coalesce on their new teams. That's it. That's all I care about when it comes to baseball. I don't give a damn what happened with the Astros. But on to college basketball. The 3 games that I had talked about yesterday, I'll recap them now, and I'll also preview Colorado-Oregon. But I gotta start with Creighton versus Seton Hall. And let me just say that Seton Hall had every opportunity to win this game. In fact, they should have won this game. But they got off to a really slow start. As the game went on, they got better, but they weren't able to overcome the slow start. Miles Powell had a terrible game. Shot 3 for 16 from the field and 1 for 11 from beyond the arc. That's not gonna cut it. You're the best player on the team. He needs to act like it. If he's off, Seton Hall is gonna lose. It's just that simple. Mamukelashvili did not play well. He could not get going from beyond the arc. He only attempted 1 3. I mean, that's terrible. That is absolutely inexcusable for a player that's shooting 39.5% from 3 this year. They were honoring Bill Raftery that night with those really cool bobbleheads. The Onions bobbleheads. I gotta tell you, they could have used Raftery. Kevin Willard did not have a good game yesterday. I did not like his game plan at all. I like Kevin Willard. I think Willard's a good coach. But he did not have a good game yesterday. But even then, Seton Hall could have very easily won. Mitch Ballack shot 0 for 7 from the field. 0 for 3 from beyond the arc. This is a guy who is averaging 12.5 points a game while shooting 45% from the field and 44.5% from beyond the arc. He's probably their best pure shooter, and he looked god-awful yesterday. Creighton won because of one player, and one player only. Damian Jefferson. We all knew that Alexander was going to get his. We all knew that Zagorowski was going to get his. And we all knew that Mahoney was going to get his. What we didn't see coming was Damian Jefferson putting up 18 points and 9 rebounds. He was their best player yesterday. And it speaks volumes to this Creighton team that when a player like Valk is having an off night, that a player like Jefferson and even Christian Bishop had a good game also, can step up and help Creighton win. This was a good win for Creighton. It's a win that sets them up very well for March. Greg McDermott has done a very good job with this team. He outcoached Kevin Willard tremendously last night. And if you're a Blue Jays fan, you have to be very optimistic about your team going into the big dance. Moving on now to Kansas versus West Virginia. And holy moly, was this a tough game to watch. It was not an enjoyable game. You couldn't even find it on national TV. It was on ESPN Plus. I mean, some of the games, I was looking around. ESPN News and ESPNU had, I think, 2 AAC games. How are you going to televise? Hold on, I think I can figure it out. I think I can figure out what games they were televising. One of them was televising UConn versus SMU for some ungodly reason. And one other network was showing George Mason versus VCU. So that's an A-10 game. It was one AAC game and one Atlantic 10 game. How on God's earth are you going to put those games on instead of Kansas, West Virginia? That is a disgrace. I don't know who came up with that idea, but that person should be ashamed of himself. I highly doubt that the Atlantic 10 has a deal like that with ESPN, where they can bump Kansas, West Virginia. Unreal. Terrible job. I don't give a damn that it was on ESPN Plus. You know what? Not everyone pays for ESPN Plus. You pay for cable. You should be able to get it there. Now look, I get ESPN Plus. I got the Disney Plus, ESPN Plus, and Hulu bundle. So it was no trouble for me, but, you know, it's trouble for the older Kansas fan or the older West Virginia fan that doesn't live there anymore and wants to see their alma mater play. Maybe he doesn't know how to get ESPN Plus. He called over his grandson. Hey, Jimmy, can you help me out? I'm trying to watch West Virginia. I'm trying to watch Kansas. I mean, come on. That is a disgrace. Alright. Now that I'm off my soapbox, I can tell you about this game. Like I said, not a fun game. Neither team played really well offensively. Kansas was atrocious from beyond the arc, and WVU shot only 32% from the field. WVU did a good job of stifling Azubuike and Agbaji, but they couldn't stop Isaiah Moss. And I don't think anyone saw that game coming from Moss. The guy was the second high man for Kansas, had 13 points, 3 for 7 from the field. Okay, that's nothing special. 3 for 5 from beyond the arc. He was their best three-point shooter yesterday, and he was perfect from the charity stripe. Him and Dodson were the sole reasons why Kansas won that game. But even then, Kansas didn't play great. WVU just played worse. Oscar, I'm pretty sure it's Tshiebwe, was good. He almost had a double-double. He's not the issue. The issue is Derek Culver. Derek Culver had a good game defensively, but when you're the second best player on a team, you can't shoot 33% from the field. You've got to be on all the time, especially when you're going up against a team like Kansas. Jordan McCabe tried to step up, but he's not a world beater. He turned the ball over 4 times. You don't want Jordan McCabe stepping up like that. Culver needs to be the guy to step up there. This was a terrible game for WVU. It just proves what I said yesterday, that this is really not a good WVU team. I like Bob Huggins. I think Huggy Bear's a great coach, but he has not done a good job this year. Depending on what team the Mountaineers face in the Big Dance, they could very easily be eliminated in the first round. The final game from yesterday that I want to talk about is Marquette-Villanova. And, look, did I pick Marquette to win? Yes, I did. But if you were betting with me, you would have made money because Marquette covered the spread. All in all, I went 2-1 with my betting picks. If you want to call them betting picks, you can. I'm just trying to save face. This was a really exciting game. Villanova dominated the first half. Marquette dominated the second half. It went just about as I expected. Marcus Howard, Sakara Neem, and Kobe McEwen had really good games for Marquette, as did Jamal Cain, which, granted, I didn't see coming. But I knew that Aneem, Howard, and McEwen would get theirs. Villanova's sextet played well. We all know who their 6 best players are. I'm not going to go through them. They need really 4 out of those 6 to be on to win. You can afford for 2 of them to be off, but if half of them are off, that spells trouble. Fortunately, Samuels, Bay, Robinson Earl, and Gillespie played well. Now, granted, only one of them was great, and that was Jeremiah Robinson Earl. He had a double-double, and I think he's going to be a really good player in the pros. But everyone played well enough to win, with the exception of Moore and Swider. I know that there are some Villanova fans that are upset that they almost choked the game away, but you got the win. That's all that matters at the end of the day. Like I said yesterday, this is a Villanova team that can beat you in a bunch of different ways. Their next game is Sunday against Temple. It's very possible that Sadiq Bey and Cole Gillespie are having off days, and Justin Moore and Cole Swider are shooting the lights out. They're a team that can pose problems in March. They just have to work on their defense. That's the biggest thing with Villanova. They did a good job of stifling Howard, McEwen, and Aneem in the first half, but then the second half, they, for lack of a better word, collapsed defensively, and they almost blew the game. They're going to have to tighten that up if they want to be really, really competitive in March. But fortunately for them, they can. Jay Wright is a good coach. I wouldn't be extremely confident picking Villanova to win the whole thing, but if they get hot, they are a very, very scary team. I do want to preview Colorado versus Oregon. And when you look at Colorado, they're a team that just kills you defensively. Guys like McKinley Wright and Tyler Bay are really good defensive players, and they're both averaging over 13.5 points a game. They are great two-way players, and I could very easily see them making an impact in the next level. But the guy who I really want to talk about is a man with one of the best names in sports history. Deshaun Schwartz. Now, there aren't too many Schwartzes in sports. There's Jeff Schwartz. There's Mitchell Schwartz. Both good offensive linemen. But those are the only two that I can think of off the top of my head. We have Deshaun Schwartz. A Schwartz who's African American, and his first name is Deshaun. I am fascinated by his backstory. I need to know his backstory. I know his father's name is Michael. By doing a quick Google search, that's all I was able to find. I don't subscribe to the Denver Post, so I couldn't read an article that they wrote about his background. I looked on some other websites and I really couldn't find anything. The point is, this guy has a really, really interesting background, and I need to know more about it. But he's also a really good three-point shooter. He's averaging 11 points a game. And Colorado has an underrated offensive game to go with a great defensive game. Tad Boyle has had mixed results in Colorado, but this is a really, really good Colorado team, and it's going to be very interesting to see what they do in March. Speaking of Colorado, though, and I know that this is a little bit of a tangent, but did you hear who they're targeting to replace Tucker as their football head coach? Eric Bieniemy. And supposedly there's mutual interest there. Look, Bieniemy was a really good Buffalo, but I don't think he should leave the Chiefs for the University of Colorado. It's not like he's going to Clemson or Alabama. He's going to a team that's had back-to-back 5-7 records. Look, I saw this point somewhere. I don't remember where. I know it was on Twitter, but I don't remember who tweeted it. It said that if African American coaches keep getting passed over for NFL head coaching jobs, that they may go to college. Now look, there's no question that Eric Bieniemy should be a head coach in the NFL. And I don't know the reason for him not being a head coach. I know it's not because he's African American, but whoever said that these great African American coaches may go to college was 100% right. Even if he doesn't go to Colorado, he ends up staying with the Chiefs, there is still allegedly mutual interest there. Look, I don't think he should go to Colorado. Don't leave your cushy job working with Mahomes. And even if you're Colorado, why would you want to hire him? He's going to leave for the NFL again. I guarantee you that if Bieniemy goes to Colorado, A, he'll do a great job, and B, he's going to be off your team in 2 or 3 years. You're going to be right back where you started from. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens with Bieniemy in the near future. But moving over to Oregon, this is a team that I've talked about in the past. I'll put a finer point on it now. Peyton Pritchard is one of the most underrated players in the nation. He's really good defensively, great offensively. Chris Duarte is another really good two-way player. And Will Richardson reminds me so much of Lou Williams that it's not even funny. They're also coached by the great Dana Altman, who does not get the credit he deserves. Massively underrated coach, but that comes with the territory of coaching Oregon. You've got to be really special in college, like Chip Kelly or Marcus Mariota, to get the recognition that you deserve as an Oregon Duck. Oregon's a really good offensive team. Colorado's a really good defensive team. This is going to be a really, really fun game to watch. Ultimately, with Oregon home, I'm going to pick the Ducks. It wouldn't stun me if Colorado won, but I think Oregon has it. The baseball story that I want to talk about isn't earth-shattering, but it is worth mentioning, and that is that the Cardinals signed Brad Miller for 1 year at $2 million. It's a good move for the Cardinals. I always liked Miller. Very versatile player. He doesn't wow you with his defense, but he can play every position except pitcher and catcher pretty well. He's also good with the bat. He hit .260 last year with 13 home runs. He's a really, really good utility infielder or backup outfielder to have. I like this move for the Cardinals, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with the NL Central this year. It's really wide open between the Cardinals, Cubs, Brewers, and Reds. I don't know who I'm going to pick to win that division. Actually, I will tell you this. March 25th is the day before opening day, and I'm going to have a full preview of this coming season. So, stay tuned for that. It's going to be really fun. Also, February 24th, you're going to get 3 shows. Nets, Islanders, and the Jacob Valk show. To make sure you don't miss out on anything, you're definitely going to want to subscribe. That's enough shameless plugging. On to this day in sports history. On this day, in 1883, Hal Chase was born. Now, you may not know the name Hal Chase. It's perfectly okay if you don't, for goodness sake. The guy was born over 130 years ago. It's okay if you don't know him, but you really should, and Yankee fans really should, because he was probably the second superstar that the Yankees franchise had. We all know that they were originally called the New York Highlanders. They played at Hilltop Park, hence the name Highlanders. Their first superstar was Jack Chesbro, 41 wins in 1904, still an American League single-season record. But Hal Chase was the second one. And Chase was incredibly dominant. Not as dominant as Chesbro, but still, very, very good player. He did have his issues, though, and he was probably the first head case in sports, and never was that more apparent than in 1907, when after his first good season, in 1906, he had .323 with 76 RBIs and 28 steals. Really good year by any standard. But after that year, he held out for a bigger salary. Can you imagine a player today holding out after just 1 year like that? That's the equivalent of Pete Alonso holding out. He threatened to play in the California League, which was really the third major league at that time. Chase did report to the Highlanders in April of 1907. In 1908, the Highlanders fired Clark Griffith, and Chase was not happy. Him and Griffith had a really, really good relationship, and he didn't get along with the new manager, Kid Elberfeld. There were always issues with Chase. He wanted to go to the California League every year. But the teams there could not support his salary demands. He was making upwards of $2,500 at that time, which was really unheard of for baseball players to make, and obviously the California teams could not support that. In 1910, he was named player manager of the Highlanders and really did not do a great job. His one full year as player manager was 1911, and he went 500. This is when the first gambling allegation surfaced about Chase. Before him, the manager of the Highlanders was George Stallings, and he claimed that Chase was, quote-unquote, laying down in games. Now, these allegations really weren't taken seriously. Stallings was not a popular manager for the Highlanders, and he was nowhere near the manager that he later became with the Boston Braves. He was the manager of the Miracle Braves team in 1914. So the allegations really weren't taken seriously, and Chase was producing. In 1910, he hit .290 with 73 RBIs and 40 steals. Don't look at the home runs. No one was hitting home runs at that time. In 1911, his player manager, .315, 62 RBIs, 36 steals. In 1912, though, he was replaced as manager by Harry Wolverton, and that really spelled the end of Chase's Highlanders career. At this time, they were still called the Highlanders. 1913 was the first year of the Yankees. Wolverton was not a good manager, and Chase had one of his worst seasons, only hit .274 with 58 RBIs. Still a good season, but not the season that he was capable of. In 1913, Frank Chance was the manager of the Yankees, and he actually benched Hal Chase because he was having a terrible year. There were some allegations that he was throwing games. He may have been hurt. That's lost to history. And he was traded to the White Sox. Now, he played well for the White Sox. Hit .286 with 39 RBIs. But he didn't have the speed that he used to have. I personally think that he was just hurt. He did have injury concerns all throughout his career. I don't think he was throwing games in the mid-1910s. In 1914, Chase started out with the White Sox, but he then jumped to the Buffalo Buffids of the Federal League, which was really the third major league. And actually, if you go on Baseball Reference, Chase's career numbers reflect what he did in the Federal League. It combines his Federal League stats with his American and National League stats. He made $6,000 for the White Sox in 1914, which is the equivalent of $150,080. He made $9,000 in Buffalo, which is the equivalent of $225,120. Chase was extremely motivated by money. He was really the first mercenary. Not that there's anything wrong with that. At the end of the day, you do need to provide security for your family, and it's all about how you do it. But Chase fought really powerful people, namely Charles Comiskey. Comiskey basically barred Chase from ever playing in the American League. He was such a powerful owner that all the other AL owners would basically fall in line and do what he said. But when the Federal League folded after 1915, he went back to Major League Baseball, namely the Cincinnati Reds, where he had probably his best season. He had .339 with 82 RBIs and 22 steals. And he finished out his career there and with the New York Giants in 1919. Now, everyone expected him to play in 1920. But Chase was not with the Giants when they reported for spring training. What happened was Chase bribed a Cubs outfielder by the name of Lee Magee, or Magee. I'm not actually sure how he pronounced it. That has obviously been lost to history. Not to hustle in certain games. This later got back to the National League president at the time, John Haidler. And Haidler told John McGraw, who was Giants manager, and a great manager at that in the Hall of Fame, to release Chase. This was when the Black Sox scandal was still permeating all throughout baseball, and Haidler wanted to nip this in the bud. Because no AL team would touch him, Chase was blackballed from Major League Baseball. There were some reports that said that Chase was the middleman between the players and the gamblers in the Black Sox scandal, but that's never been confirmed. The grand jury in the Black Sox trial actually subpoenaed Chase, but California refused to extradite him. And just for whatever it's worth, all the Black Sox were acquitted. They pled the fifth, and they were acquitted. Just an interesting footnote to that part of baseball history. When Commissioner Landis decreed that no player who threw a game or promised to throw a game would ever be allowed in baseball, that ended Chase's hopes of a comeback. He played in a bunch of minor leagues after that, similar to Shoeless Joe Jackson. He experienced money troubles towards the end of his life and died at the age of 64 in 1947. We always talk about, should Pete Rose be in the Hall of Fame? Should Shoeless Joe Jackson be in the Hall of Fame? Should Eddie Cicotti be in the Hall of Fame? Hal Chase never comes up, and he should. He was the best first baseman of his era, and was an excellent fielder. He was Mark Teixeira good. Don't look at how many errors he had. Those are reflective of the era in which he played. There was no great fielding first baseman when you look at it from modern standards. But if you look at the reports from the time, everyone from Babe Ruth to Walter Johnson hailed this guy's defense. Also, he threw games, so it's impossible to know how his stats were affected by that exactly. Bill James stupidly said that Chase was only a C-grade defensive first baseman. That just proves that Bill James doesn't know his ass from his elbow when it comes to baseball. Hal Chase was one of the best fielding first basemen in baseball history. Alright, if you're the best first baseman of your era defensively, you're one of the best defensive first basemen in baseball history. It's just that simple. To give him a C is ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous. All in all, Hal Chase is an extremely controversial figure. He's one of the more interesting characters in baseball history, and it's a shame that he's been lost to history as much as he has. Alright, I've got time for another Mount Rushmore. Here we go, let's do it. Next up on the docket is the Atlanta Braves. And this counts their time as the Boston Braves, the Milwaukee Braves, etc., etc. This is by far the hardest Mount Rushmore I've ever done. There are 9 players who I thought about for this list. It's Greg Maddux, Tom Glavine, John Smoltz, Hank Aaron, Eddie Matthews, Warren Spahn, Kid Nichols, Phil Niekro, and Chipper Jones. 2 of those guys, Hank Aaron and Warren Spahn, are ironclad locks. If there's a Mount Rushmore of Braves out there that doesn't have those 2 guys on it, then that Mount Rushmore should be blown to smithereens. But the other 2 slots are really tough. Ultimately, here's how I narrowed it down. Phil Niekro was just not as dominant as Maddux, Glavine, and Smoltz. So, I knocked him out. Kid Nichols was pitching in the 1800s. A lot of his greatness comes from the fact that he was playing in an era where the competition just wasn't as good. Now, that doesn't take away from his greatness. He's a Hall of Famer, and he should be. But I do have to punish him for facing inferior talent, so I crossed him off. Chipper Jones and Eddie Matthews kind of canceled each other out. Jones was the better contact hitter. Matthews was the better power hitter. So I decided to exclude both of them. That leaves 3. Greg Maddux, Tom Glavine, and John Smoltz. The anchors of those dominant Braves teams of the 90s. Were they really the team of the 90s? No, they weren't. The Yankees won 3 World Series that decade. 2 of them, 96 and 99, beating the Braves. 98 beating the Padres. The Braves only won 1 World Series, 1995, beating the Indians. The point is, the Yankees are the real team of the 90s, not the Braves. In fact, the Blue Jays, since they won the World Series in 92 and 93, have more of an argument of being the team of the 90s than the Braves do. But I digress. Because Greg Maddux spent the majority of his career not in Atlanta, he spent 11 years with the Braves, but he spent 12 years with the Cubs, Dodgers, and Padres. I have to punish him for that. Maddux was more dominant than Glavine and Smoltz. So, by that metric, if you want to put Maddux in over Glavine and Smoltz, you can. But I look at total body of work more, and for that reason, I'm keeping Maddux out. Therefore, Glavine and Smoltz are in. The correct Mount Rushmore is Hank Aaron, Warren Spahn, John Smoltz, and Tom Glavine. That's right. Smoltz over Glavine. I'm going to tell you why. Again, Glavine was more dominant than Smoltz. But Smoltz had 3 more years with the Braves. Glavine spent 17 years with the Braves. Smoltz spent 20 years with the Braves. In that time, John Smoltz accumulated 3,011 strikeouts. And bear in mind, he did this as a starter, then a reliever when he came back from injury, and then he came back as a starter. That's why I'm putting Smoltz ahead of Glavine. If you want to disagree with me, you can. Hit me up on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Again, if you're putting Aaron and Spawn on your Mount Rushmore, you can put in any of Maddox, Chipper, Eddie Matthews, Kid Nichols, Phil Necro, Glavin, and Smoltz. That's perfectly fine. That's my list. I'm sticking with it. I'd love to hear yours. Hit me up on Twitter at RealJacobValk. I'd love to have a Twitter time tomorrow discussing it. Until next time, I am Jacob Valk saying that baseball is like church. Many attend, but few understand.